Okay, let me share my screen. Entire window. Okay, let's review what I guess the kind of the goal is. Can you see my screen?
Yeah.
Whoops. Control plus. Control plus. Wait, how do you make it? Okay. Okay, so the goal is to be able to create a space that we can play games in. And I kind of broke this down into different tasks, and some of them are done, so I'll mark them with done. So to be able to easily create a new space, so create space is done. Be able to create a space from pre-made templates. This was done, but it's kind of in a broken state right now because I changed the persistence of how it's being stored in the database. Show a space, so you can load a URL and get a URL for a slug and get a space back, and that's done. I need to re-enable VR immersive, so all the JavaScript is coded up from scratch again, and I'll be able to review that with you guys. And so we have to put back enable multiplayer presence. On the 2D side, made quite a bit of progress with this. Edit a space 2D mode with a HTML menu overlay. We don't have population of environmental things. All we can do right now is add a box or a cone or a sphere. But we want to be able to get to the point where we can add monsters and some simple cause and effect. And down below I had sort of the architecture talking about the pieces of the client side. So a client starts off by requesting a URL for a specific space defined by a slug. So the xr.space/ the slug. A web page is rendered, then the JavaScript loads, and so we have a bundle of JavaScript that has Babylon.js in there. And then amongst that JavaScript is something called an orchestrator that will make connections to the WebSocket and so on and so forth. And then I talked about plugins, but none of this is in play yet, so I kind of got ahead of myself. So I like to come back and review this just to keep our head straight about where we're going. And now I will give a demo of the work that was done, and then we can kind of go through the code to kind of catch you guys up on what I've done. So if we go to localhost, we've got this janky looking homepage, and all it has is a list of spaces. So there's no authentication yet. It's just welcome to the XR space, create and share experiences in an extended reality space. So you can click through to spaces, and this is actually where a person would manage their own spaces. And I kind of did this kind of funky thing here, which is manage. It starts with an M because I wanted the URL for the spaces themselves to be as simple as possible. Therefore, when you create a new space, here I can delete these. Delete this space and delete this space. We can create a new space here. Styling's really ugly, just bear with me. So let's call this space ABC, ABC. And here we could select a template. There's no image preview, and in fact this template is not even used, but it was a way of specifying some pre-bag of data that would be associated with the space, and that data is not used yet. So this essentially is broken. So, but you're forced to pick one before it allows you to save. So now I have a space called ABC. The slug is automatically generated for you with the name. That way, if two people wanted to call their space ABCs, they wouldn't have a collision. But if you wanted to edit it, at the time that you edit it, that's when you edit your slug, and this is where it would give you an error if there was a collision or not. But in the beginning, I decided let's just make it easy. We'll just auto assign it. So those are the three functions. You can create it, you can edit it, you can delete it, and now we can enter it. So when you enter the space, now you'll notice the URL changed to just the slug. So that makes the URL for sharing spaces as simple as possible. It's just going to be the xr.space / the slug, whatever that is. And there's nothing in this space. There's a tiny menu button in the upper right corner. So when you click on this, it actually shows you an iframe, which I've kept to 25% of the screen. or is it 20%? So here's the menu. You can toggle this, and the idea here is that we would put all the functionality that's easy to implement in traditional HTML forms on the right side and have it influence the left side. So you can add up to 3 different kinds of entities into this space. So we can add a box. So currently I haven't hooked up, when you add an entity, it's not actually doing anything in here. So we do need to make a refresh. So now we see that box. I can open up the menu again. If you highlight the entity, you can click on this, and it will actually show you the components attached to it. So anytime we made a box, I auto-generated 3 components for you for typical things like position, rotation, and scale. Now these components are 3 independent records in the database. So there's a has-many relationship between entity and components. And this is what I worked on. You can click on the component, and then it will expand that component into its parts. So this is made possible with a Elixir plugin for kind of embedded schemas. So even though this is all in a map that's in a column called data, we do have strict typing over this. So it knows that it needs to be a number. So if I start typing like -1, you see how it says it's invalid here because I haven't finished typing. It's going to be -1, and now it's valid again. So and you see it moved over to the left. We can also move it up. So 3.3 is okay. And I'm not done typing, but so it's doing autosave. So I wait for 2 seconds and then I'll save it. You do 1.5, and then it saves. You can also modify the rotation. So we can do 2, and when you change focus, it'll update here as well. And we can add a cone. So now there's 2 entities in here. The cone. Oh yes, we have to refresh again. So here we have our cone. We can add a sphere. Refresh again. And also this works in multi-browser. So if I open up Firefox, so if I go to localhost ABC, I'm attached to the same space, but over on the left, if I, let's say, change the location of the box, let's put this down lower to -1 in the y-axis, so it'll drop down. It updates over here. So we have multi-user support. So this is basically where I left off. Is we basically created a simplified version of like Blender for multiplayer using Phoenix channels, and this is just regular kind of HTML, and this is Babylon. Any questions up to this point?
That's very cool. It's already kind of working. You're basically sending the messages you have to the backend through some Phoenix channel and then have it broadcast to all the connections.
Right.
I see. Okay, yeah.
So
very cool.
There's a couple of basic pieces here. We can start looking at it from a website point of view. So here is where a space is shown. This is the /ABC is our slug for a space, and it hits a space controller. So if you look at the space controller, this says I'm going to take the slug that you gave me in the parameters, and then there's a function for getting that struct. So this is get space by slug, given a slug, and this will give you back a struct. So down here, you can do a demonstration of this. Spaces get space by slug. If you were to give it ABC, you get back a structure, And all it has in here, so ignore this data. This was the this was like a specification for the scene that you picked. Remember when we created it, it asked you to pick a template. So that template, I was playing around with XML or HTML to specify this. This is not being used right now, so ignore this thing. But we have the description, and the entities here is not loaded yet. So it doesn't, this is not, um, this is not brought in into the template. So then we render the show template. So over here, if we look at templates, underneath space, we have a show. And it has a partial here. Actually, I should maybe put an underscore here to just demonstrate that it's a partial. So here's a show. And I'm rendering a partial here. Let me put an underscore in front of that. And let me modify this with an underscore. Okay. So we know that's it's a partial. Let me just make sure that this still works. Refresh this. Okay, yeah, that still works. So in this partial, I added some inline styling just for the background of the page. That's and also where the iframe goes, some absolute positioning for the menu. And so yeah, here's that menu that we can click on. That is this thing over here. And sorry, this, yeah, that's the button, that's the menu. And then what it does is it toggles visibility of this thing. So here's the toggle. So we add an event listener on click, that we change the class on it. We toggle the class to show and hide that iframe. So that's how we get this sort of behavior. And that iframe is just going to edit space. So that is kind of the meat of a live view, which is going to allow you to render the list of entities and whatnot. But this space over here doesn't have a list of entities. What we're actually doing is in the show template, any code that you put in here between these tags here is actually compiled into a function, and it will be executed when the template is rendered. So here we render those styles. We render a canvas, a blank canvas to show our 3D stuff. And then here we populate a variable on the window object called serialize space that passes back serialize in the space. So over here, remember I assigned space is the result of spaces get space by slug. So right, so we have this space, and then there's another function called spaces serialize, and this I convert what all the entities and all the components that are associated with this space into a JSON format, and I make that available to the front end in a variable. So if we do serialize on the space, that's this struct, what we get back is this JSON looking thing. Let me do IO puts. Okay, so we get an object that is a list that we can iterate through using JavaScript and feed that to Babylon and say, go and draw these things. Okay, so if we take a peek at this thing has some basic database functions that are saying, okay, give me a list of entities with their components given the space .space_id, and then it returns an object that's like a list of entities. These are the entities, and also the slug, which is space.slug, and then JSON encoded. So that's all it's doing, it's giving back. And if you were to take a look at these functions, these are just database functions, right? From the entities table, matching the space ID, repo all, which is select all, and then preload them with components. Components is the have many identity, and so if you preload the components, you'll get back the data. So here I have specified a way to encode it. So every time you want the JSON equivalent of that, this directive automatically will make the type and data available when it gets encoded into JSON. So that works with JSON and the library JSON encode. It will give you back these two values. And that's how we embed them. So if you look here in this, the data that's coming back, you'll see the type and the data coming back for components that are attached for entities. So all we're doing is we're hitting that controller, we're giving back the serialized scene to the front end. So if we look back onto the front end, we should know something about how assets are compiled. So in this folder, we have this assets, and in here we have JavaScript folder, and this is all TypeScript. And we're using this package JSON to set up our scripts. So we're saying when we want to build our project or deploy our project, run this script called esbuild. And this uses the project called, I think it's called esbuild, which is a faster way of compiling your node dependencies without depending on Node to be your compiler. It actually uses Go to be the compiler. So it's faster, and there's less breakages with different versions. So in this specification, you can specify multiple entry points. Each one of these entry points becomes app.js orchestrator. It will become JS. It will become orchestrator JS. So in here, the two entry points will be this file and this file. It won't build anything for the other files. So every import that you use in these files, these imports, they will get rolled up, and it will create one giant bundle for it. And what the esbuild script does, esbuild, is it will put them inside priv static assets, these two entry points. And so if we look in our priv directory, we get priv static. I need to plug in my battery. Priv static assets. You'll see this is the combined JavaScript, app.js. All of this stuff here is combined together. Right now, this is what do you call? This is just something called source mapping. So I think when you go to production, this actually isn't in there. And orchestrator JS is all the dependency on orchestrator JS, which is not that many. The file ends at about 1,000 lines or so. So these are pieces that we're writing, and the imports are bundling in together. But sometimes you don't want to bundle something. Maybe you want to get it from the CDN. So you can specify these globals, and globals will say, I'm going to look on the window object for these things. So do not bundle them into my artifact. So if you see here in orchestrator, I actually at the top, not this one, orchestrator.ts, much shorter file. This is the non-bundled version. I am actually importing from Babylon, but Babylon is a huge library. It's not getting bundled in here because I'm getting Babylon from the CDN. So in our layout folder, we have different kind of layouts. So if we see lib under web, under template layout, we have our regular root. This is for all the other web pages. we'll have this asset, assets app.js. This will get served up from priv, right? The bundled version, that artifact. But since all the other pages don't need Babylon.js, it only needs app.js. That's the only thing that's mentioned in this version. But on this version, the slug that we're entering the space, we're going to use this version, the XR root version. And this one, you can see I have the CDN versions of this code because there's no reason to load these up on other pages. And this page has the orchestrator.js, so we have our code for that. So if we look back into our space controller, up at the top, we override the default root layout with XR root layout. That will bring in our orchestrator. And then if we follow through to look at the assets, JavaScript, orchestrator, this is, I wonder what's this complaining about. It is not a module. Okay, I don't know how to fix. Maybe it's some config. Anyway, this is just the class, but at the very end of the file, it will call a window function to instantiate itself. When the DOM content is loaded, we'll get that serialized space. By this time, remember in the show template, we said take the serialized scene and put that on the window as a variable called serialized space. Here we're fetching it back and then instantiating the orchestrator and passing this, the serialized space, to the orchestrator along with the space canvas. And this will do the work of drawing everything. So in here, if we pop in here, this is just at the top. We're going to create the scene. This is going to, typical Babylon boilerplate stuff, creates the engine, creates cameras, and then it's going to parse the initial scene, which takes all the entities, and then for every entity, it will map through them and then find or create the mesh. Meanwhile, on the editing side, remember we have that menu over here. This is loading up an independent website or web page. That web page is a live view. So if you go into live, it's called Space Edit Live. And here is the brains of it. So everyone that loads that page will get the entry point starting at mount. It says, give me the slug, which we passed in. It loads that space, gets all the entities, and then it loads them into the socket. So it has a stateful knowledge of all the entities. And then the rest of it is kind of just these actions on it, right? So looking at the form, there's that add plus title here, this thing, and then it's got these drop downs. So if I pick one of these things, what happens when I click add? So over here, I'm picking one of these things, which is really just a string here of box, cone, whatever, and then a button for add. But the form does a Phoenix submit called add entity. And if we come over here, we can handle those things. So we would expect to see a handle event called add entity. And then in here, we basically update the socket with the new entity. Let's see, where do we? Oh, we create an entity. We get back that entity, and then we put it back here. So remember, one of the things that we're not doing is when we add an entity, we're not updating this space. I wanted to really quickly see if we could implement that. So one of the things we could do is send ourselves a message. So if we do get OK entity, maybe we can send that data to the front end. So why don't we do this? Entity, repo, preload components. Okay, so at this point we have an entity with components, and it's actually selected entity became that. Okay, so why don't we just send a message to the front end this way? So we can do vxr web.endpoint.broadcast with the topic. Actually, where is that? I'm just going to copy this business here. So when we add entity, we want to send a message. So we're sending a message to the slug. Before was component change, and I'm going to say entity created. And I guess I can have the entity ID. Actually, I want to know what the JSON for this is. Maybe we can just use that. So if I get entities equal repo all entity, I'm going to get one of them, list first, entities. And then I'm going to preload their components. So entity equal entity, pipe that to repo preload components. So now I have an entity just like this. What would happen if I did JSON encode entity? Okay, so I get the ID. Parent is null, name, and components, blah, blah, blah. Okay, I think I just want this. I'm just going to send this. JSON encode entity. Okay, this is on the entity created. So that's going to send that message. What happened here? Okay. Let's console log that out in the front end. So in the front end, all the JavaScript right now is just an orchestrator. It's just in one junk drawer that we need to figure out later. But in here, we create a new socket. We create a channel related to a space channel. And then on the channel, we're listening to component change. And every time the component changed, we found a mesh matching that component's entity ID. And then we handled process component, which is going to update its position, rotation, and scale. So in here, we just need a space channel on entity created params. Actually, I think this will be the entity, and do something here. But if we look at the parse initial scene, this is handling each entity. It's doing this find or create mesh, so I think we can just use this. So finder, so I think that should work. So let's give it a try. I'm gonna bring in another box. Okay, got an error here. expected broadcasted payload to be a map. Got this. Oh, okay. It needs to be a map, and we gave it a string. So let's go back to this part here. So this is a string, and can I give the entity? What would happen if I do that? Let's try refreshing this. Let's bring in another cone. Okay. I can't see if it added it because it's in the way, so let's move it out of the way. Okay, so there's two cones. So I think it worked. Let's try creating a new space. Let's just delete this space. New space. We enter in here. Add a box. There's our box. Move it over. We'll add a cone. We'll add a sphere. And then we can change the scale on our sphere. 6. Okay. Okay. So next steps. So this is what we did today. We kind of reviewed the work. I'll answer any questions you guys have. After an entity is created, view the entity in the scene, and maybe add the ability to delete an entity. And then maybe next time, or next steps for me anyway, I want to try to deploy this to GigaElixir, enable immersive VR mode, and then we can test this inside the Oculus Quest to see how it fares. So first, any questions, anything you want to see that I could show you, any confusion about how the pieces kind of work together? For every time that I worked, I did put this up on a YouTube channel. So you can go to, is it channel? Is it C, I think? Something like that. That ain't me. Nope. Where's my channel? Your channel. I thought there's a way to have like a shorter version of this, but yeah, I have all of my working sessions in here. They're boring because I take time to think about stuff, and I'm talking to myself. Sometimes I'm just staring at the screen in silence for 5 minutes. But if you wanted to catch up, or if you're like eating and you wanted to watch my progress on that, everything that I've done over the past couple of days is here. So coming back to here. You should just have 3 people on crew all the time. Is there any part that you guys want to see? Can you guys hear me?
Yeah, I mean, nothing in particular, I think. It was kind of understood. I thought, I'm hoping that it sort of understood it, like the way you added this thing. Basically broadcast a message or send a message to front end adds some part to handle it, and the rendering part is already done. So my guess is when you delete this, you would broadcast a similar message, except you perhaps would include all of the entities that's still there and then just run the same function again. But that would just be my my initial reaction to that, if you were going to delete this thing.
Yeah. Do we want to try to build the delete ability?
Yeah.
Yeah, sure. Well, I was going to ask, so how was it so far, this version, different from the previous?
The main version is that every entity and every component is its own record. So the persistence is different. Also, the project is the latest version of the Phoenix, and they changed their asset build pipeline. So it's no longer Webpack, it's this ES build thing. So I had trouble converting the previous Phoenix project to it, and so I just created a new Phoenix project, and so it's possible we'll just port some of those things over again. In fact, multiple times that I got stuck in this project, I just did the other project, and I go, oh, okay, I actually did it better than the previous version.
I see. Cool.
So this is okay. So coming back, we have the edit side, which is a live view. So we go to space edit live here, and so how do we want to be able to delete something? If we come to how it looks, one way is to have a little X button next to them. We could do that first. So next to every entity, here's the entities list. So here's the mapping over every entity. It does a line item. And here's the entity name. And so let me just add something here. Span and times. Let's see how this looks. Okay, I think I need a little bit more space. I'll just cheat here. What is it? Padding left? Margin. Can you do this? Okay. Just do 1 EM, probably be enough. Is there a font size? Okay. I mean, it's ugly. Maybe we should make this a button. How would a button look? Button, button, and times. Yeah, that is super ugly. Okay, I'll go with. The only thing I like about it is that the cursor changed. CSS change cursor to pointer. Cursor pointer. Okay, it's a pointer now. And let's send a message to the backend. So we'll do Phoenix click, delete, entity. You know, with all these messages, I kind of want to do it SQL style, where you have delete and then you have a noun or from table with ID kind of stuff. We probably clean this up later, but okay, Phoenix value ID will be the entity ID. So we're sending a message to the backend. So if I refresh this, click on this, it should crash. Okay, here's our crash. Let's take a look at the error. It says we need a handle event delete entity with an ID. Perfect. So let's go add that. So over here, let's add that to the top. Need that. Just add it here. Okay, so what we want to do is spaces delete entity with the ID. Okay, and since that's done, we can remove it out of our entities list. Okay, so socket assigns has entities, and so we need to do enum.filter over the collection and run a function over it. The function will keep anything that's true. So if we want to come back with everything except that entity, we would say where given the entity ID is not equal to ID. That should give us the new list of entities, new entities, and we want to assign this back into the socket. So we can do socket equal assign socket entities, new entities, and if it was selected, we want to clear the components. I should mention that we have a couple of variables here. So we've got entities, we have selected entity and component change set. We want to change both of these if either of them belong to the entity that we're deleting. So this clears the entity. I'm going to write this as a note. Okay, so if socket assigns selected entity case. This isn't a pretty way of doing it. I'm sure there's a more elegant way of doing this. Selected entity ID equal to this ID. Then, oh, can't do it this way. Case. Let's do a case statement. Case socket assigns selected entity. So if the value of that thing maybe condition. And we'll pass back a socket, I guess. Condition. So if this thing equals socket assigns selected entity ID equal ID. So if that's true, then assign into the socket to clear it. So you got to clear selected entity. Any other conditions, just return the socket. And we'll just repeat this for component change set. Component change set data entity ID. And we'll say component change set. Okay. Probably need to refactor this to make this a lot nicer, but I think this probably should work. So we refresh this page. What have we got in here? So let's delete this sphere looking thing. Whoops. Oh, okay. We didn't broadcast anything in the front, so we're just deleting it in the backhand. Okay, we can test that first. So we delete this. Oh, we got an error. No function clause matching delete entity. Spaces delete. Oh, I don't have a function called delete entity.
You probably won't be able to delete it without at least the space ID, right? Like,
That's just deleting it from the database. We don't need the space ID.
interesting. So it would be in the space.
But let me
You
check.
put it in,
Let me check. It says we don't have this defined. Delete entity. Yeah. Oh, it requires the entity, not the entity ID. We actually don't have. We don't have a function that can just delete by the ID. We can either add one or we can just wrap it in an entity. So we can just do delete entity. Okay, I'll just cheat a little and do this. Okay, that should let us delete it. Refresh. Delete. Okay, it's gone. Deleted. Okay, now we need to broadcast something. So let's copy our broadcast code. Okay, entity deleted. And we don't have an entity here, right? So we'll just pass back the entity ID. And then in the orchestrator, we'll just throw some code in here for entity deleted. And this should be can't do this? This scene get meshes by ID. Let's just call this params. Params ID meshes. Meshes for each mesh.dispose. Cool. So you add a box, add a cone. We're going to move the cone. And add a sphere. Can't see the sphere. It's probably inside the box. Let's move it out or scale it. Okay, let's move it higher. Okay, delete the sphere, delete the cone, delete the box. Cool.
Wait.
Yeah. You had a question? Were you saying sweet or wait?
Delete.
Okay. All right, I'll put this up, and yeah, next step is we'll try to put back some of the VR stuff, and the difference is we'll be able to. Remember, we had the gun where you could shoot around and only create squares, but creating the menu for that actual thing was actually the hardest. It's not easy because you have to create a texture, and then you got to create buttons. Whereas this, we can do, I think, easier development because it's HTML, and then we can share messages. And so, coming back to this idea, it's not as nice because you have to kind of jump out to 2D mode to get to that menu, and then you jump back into 3D. But we can test out this experience and see what it's like. All right. Good night, guys.
Cool. Thanks. Good night.